The Zerithian flagship slid into Earth's orbit like a blade through water, silent and gleaming, its hull reflecting the pale blue planet below. For most humans, the sight of such a ship would have been enough to trigger fear, awe, or panic. For Princess Kalira, heir to the vast Zerithian Empire, it was simply another assignment, another world to catalogue, another species to judge for its value. Her people were scientists first and rulers second. They measured everything in probabilities, calculations, and the cold certainty of physics. Emotions, to them, were relics of primitive biology. Love, desire, intimacy, these were considered distractions, dangerous impulses that once weakened empires before logic set them straight. Kalira herself had been raised in this creed, trained from birth to observe, dissect, and command. Yet, as she stood before the viewport staring at Earth, she felt something her tutors had never prepared her for, a restless anticipation. Earth was not the first world she had visited. She had walked among the crystalline forests of Thrynn, negotiated with methane-breathing colonies on Var, and watched stars die from orbit. But humans were different, or so the reports claimed. They were fragile yet reckless, prone to conflict, and somehow endlessly adaptable. Against every prediction, they had not only survived but thrived. That alone made them worth her attention. When her escort announced the arrival of the human envoy, Kalira adjusted her ceremonial mantle. The door slid open, and Daniel stepped inside. He was tall for a human, with dark hair that refused to stay tamed, and eyes that held a flicker of curiosity rather than fear. He wore no armor, carried no weapon. Only a simple translator device hung at his side. For a moment, the silence stretched. Kalira studied him like she would a new life form, noting the rhythm of his breath, the heat rising from his skin, the slight hesitation in his stance. He was not bred for battle, not conditioned for diplomacy the way she was. And yet, he did not shrink under her gaze. "You are the princess?" Daniel asked, his voice steady though his accent bent the Zerithian words. "I am Kalira of the high lineage," she replied. "You will serve as my interpreter for the duration of my study. Nothing more." He gave a small nod, though the corner of his mouth curved upward in what humans called a smile. "Understood. Though I hope it will be something more than translation. Perhaps understanding." The word struck her. Understanding. Among her people, knowledge was extracted, dissected, and stored. It was never shared in the way he implied. She dismissed the thought, but it lingered. They began with formalities, discussions of human governance, trade routes, planetary resources. Daniel answered her questions with patience, sometimes fumbling for words, sometimes offering metaphors she found illogical yet strangely vivid. When she asked about Earth's oceans, he didn't list statistics of depth or mineral composition. He spoke of the sound of waves crashing against cliffs, of salt carried on the wind, of the endless horizon that humbled even the proudest heart. Kalira found herself listening more than recording. The images he painted stirred something unquantifiable, as though his words carried more weight than the data streams flooding her console. When she challenged him, "Why do humans speak in symbols instead of facts?" he only laughed softly. "Because facts tell you what a thing is," he said. "But stories tell you why it matters." She had no response. For the first time in years, she felt unprepared. As the meeting drew on, Kalira caught herself observing not the content of his words, but the cadence of his voice, the way his eyes lit when he described something he loved. She reminded herself that this was research, observation, a controlled exchange. And yet, when he leaned closer to adjust the translator, she noted the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of something earthy, alien to her, yet not unpleasant. That night, as she returned to her quarters, Kalira replayed their conversation in her mind. Not the official record, but the parts that unsettled her. The smile, the laughter, the notion that knowledge could be shared not as data, but as experience. She tried to dismiss it as human peculiarity, yet sleep did not come easily. The Empire had sent her to study humans as subjects. Instead, she found herself remembering one human in particular. And though she would never admit it, the princess who had been trained to measure everything by reason felt, for the first time, the shadow of something her people had long abandoned, curiosity not of the mind, but of the heart. The second meeting was scheduled for 1 hour. It stretched into 3 before anyone noticed. Kalira told herself the delay was strategic. Humans often revealed more when allowed to wander, but even she felt the thinness of that excuse. The truth was simpler. She wanted to hear Daniel speak again. They met in the ship's observation gallery, a long crescent of glass that framed Earth like a living portrait. Below, the planet turned with unbothered grace, clouds drifting, oceans breathing, city lights pulsing along the night side like constellations threaded across land. Kalira had watched many worlds from orbit. None had ever seemed to watch back. This one did. Or perhaps it was the man standing beside her, hands tucked into his jacket, breath fogging the glass for a heartbeat before it vanished. "I brought something," he said. From his pocket he drew a tiny device no larger than a fingertip. Human-made, imperfect, edges scuffed. A music chip. Nothing classified. Just something I thought you might like. Music, Kalira repeated, as if tasting the word. Zerithians categorized sound as signal, noise, or weapon. But they also maintained an archive of alien artifacts, curiosities catalogued and quarantined. She could justify this as research. Proceed. He placed the chip on the rail. Soft notes rose, trembling at first, then gathering into a pattern that was not quite symmetrical yet clearly intentional. It was a human voice, layered over strings, and a distant percussion that felt like footsteps through wet sand. The singer did not deliver facts. She offered ache, wonder, the kind of longing that cannot be graphed. Kalira listened without blinking. She felt the tones articulate along the bones of her skull, settling in the hollow places logic never reached. "What function does this serve?" she asked, quieter than intended. Daniel tilted his head, hearing the same question she'd asked yesterday, but knowing it landed differently now. "It arranges feeling," he said. "Like you arrange data." "That is inefficient." "Completely," he agreed, smiling. "And necessary." She let the piece finish. A silence followed, deliberate, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. Only after it settled did she speak. "Your species seems to invest in things that cannot defend a border or fuel a fleet." "You've seen our fleets," he teased. "I have seen your cinema," she said dryly, then surprised herself by allowing the corner of her mouth to lift a fraction. A Zerithian smile, almost theoretical. Daniel's laugh came easily. "Guilty. We exaggerate. But the exaggerations say something true, that we hope to be larger than we are." He gestured toward the planet's curve. "We build tech to reach the stars, and then we bring songs because arriving empty-handed feels rude." "Rude," she echoed, storing the word. "You use politeness to mask fear." "Sometimes. Other times to honor awe." A pause. "And which is this?" He considered. "Oh," he said at last. Kalira turned to the glass. Earth's terminator, where day meets night, slid across the Sahara like a veil. She tried to view the scene as her instructors would: mass, velocity, energy flux. But the music still hummed inside her, reshaping the space around those measurements. "Oh." The term refused to be filed under superstition. "Show me another," she said. They spent an hour sampling fragments: whale song recorded in a polar sea, a street drummer holding time for strangers, a cathedral chorus captured on a cheap phone, the hiss of a spacecraft's air system woven into ambient melody. Kalira asked precise questions and received imprecise answers that, inexplicably, satisfied. When she requested the mathematical structure, Daniel admitted he didn't know. "I could ask a composer," he said. "But they'd probably start by asking what you felt." "What I felt is not data. It's still real." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. They shifted to language. Kalira's command of standard was flawless, but Earth tongues multiplied like coral reefs. Daniel taught her a handful of words from his childhood: Titapool, dusk, homesick. She repeated them with near-perfect articulation, yet he shook his head gently. "It's not just the shape of the word. It's the gravity. Homesick isn't illness, it's a compass needle pointing backward." "Backward motion is rarely productive," she said. He glanced at the planet. "Tell that to migrating birds." Her implant retrieved the fact in an instant. Avian navigation via magnetic fields, celestial cues, polarized light. Efficient. And yet the image of a small body crossing an ocean because something inside insisted, this was not about efficiency. It was about an insistence with no equation. Daniel, she said carefully, tasting his name without the translator's filter, what do humans mean when they say, I miss you, to someone who stands in the same room? He looked at her then, really looked, as if the distance between them had been a fog he could finally pierce. It means there's a version of the moment they want to be inside, closer, clearer, braver, and they aren't there yet. Her pulse made a small, surprised misstep. She catalogued the anomaly. Braver. Proximity can be a kind of courage, he said. He didn't move closer. He also didn't step back. They reviewed diplomatic language after that, protocols, timelines, the choreography of meetings. Still, the conversation kept slipping its leash, nosing into stray fields, the scent of rain on pavement, constellations renamed by sailors who got lonely, the way a hand can learn the story of a surface without the eyes. Kalira found herself offering details she had never volunteered, the metallic hush of a Zarithian nursery, the sound of her mother's boots on polished deck plating, the way starlight stains a window if you stare long enough. None of it belonged in a report. All of it felt essential. When they finally parted, the ship's chronometers had long surpassed their slot. Kalira paused at the threshold. I will require the music files for analysis, she said, tone neutral. Of course, Daniel replied, but his expression softened, as if he recognized a kind of concession. Princess, do you ever stand somewhere and feel the room is slightly too small for what's happening inside you? She considered the gallery, built to showcase a planet. Too small. Impossible. And yet, perhaps, she said. In rare cases. Me too. He dipped his head. See you tomorrow. The door closed. Alone, Kalira touched the rail where the music chip had rested, as if some residue might remain. The room felt altered, dimensions subtly retuned. She summoned a new file and labeled it with a name that would not alarm her advisors. Subject H01. Behavioral Artifacts, Emotional Encoding. Then, almost against protocol, she opened a second file and gave it no title at all. From the viewport, Earth turned, ordinary, defiant, luminous. Kalira stood still and let the not-quite silence of the gallery gather around her. Somewhere, inside or outside, a boundary shifted one grain's width. Curiosity, once a tool, had become a tide. And tides, she had learned today, return. The third meeting was not supposed to happen at all. The schedule listed only 2 exchanges before the diplomatic council convened. Yet Kalira requested another session for cultural clarification, a phrase that sounded suitably formal in the Empire's records. No one questioned her. Who among her staff would dare? This time she chose a smaller chamber. No observation gallery, no audience. Just a circular table, 2 chairs, and a window cut into the hull where Earth's moon loomed, chalk-white and scarred, its light washing silver across the floor. She arrived early, restless, fingers tightening and releasing against the chair's edge. The chamber's silence pressed in heavier than usual. When the door opened and Daniel stepped inside, Kalira caught herself standing straighter than protocol required. He carried no music this time, no device, only himself. You wanted more clarification, he said, with that half-smile again. Indeed, she replied, though the word felt brittle. Yesterday's samples were incomplete. I require further context. He sat opposite her, studying her as though she were the one under examination. Context about music. About humans. He leaned back, considering. That's a broad subject. Where do you want to start? Kalira hesitated. Her training told her to narrow variables, to define the question precisely. But precision had failed her yesterday. The music had bypassed it, gone straight to places she had no vocabulary for. Tell me, she said finally, why your people embrace imperfection. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's not how I'd put it. We don't embrace imperfection. We accept that perfection doesn't exist. Cracks let light through. She frowned. Cracks weaken structure. They precede collapse. Sometimes. Other times they make the whole thing more beautiful. He leaned forward now, voice softening. Do you want me to show you? Her pulse betrayed her again, quickening. She masked it with a curt nod. Proceed. Instead of producing a device, he extended his hand across the table, palm upward. The gesture was simple, uncalculated, nothing like the ceremonial grips of Zarithian diplomacy. She stared at it. Her instincts screamed against the breach of formality, yet some inner gravity tugged her forward. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand into his. Warmth. Pressure. The ridges of his skin pressed against hers, each ridge a microtopography her sensors could have mapped in detail, but the raw data paled beside the sensation itself. A current shot through her nerves, not pain, not exactly pleasure, but a recognition that something irreversible had just shifted. She tried to speak, but the translator device hung silent at her side. Words dissolved before reaching her tongue. Daniel did not hurry her. He simply held her hand, thumb brushing once across her knuckles, as if confirming she was not an artifact but alive, present, choosing. "This," he said quietly, "is why we value touch. It reminds us we're not alone." The phrase landed like a meteor. Not alone. Zarithians were always surrounded by their peers, bound in endless chains of command, yet she had never felt the absence of solitude pierced so directly. Not alone was not a statistic. It was an anchor. Kilira withdrew her hand at last, though the echo of contact lingered in her skin. She straightened, searching for composure. "Your methods lack discipline," she said. "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But discipline doesn't hold you at night." The bluntness startled her. Yet instead of offense, she felt envy. A life where such words could be spoken without sanction. A world where bonds were forged not in treaties, but in the space between two hands. They spoke on. She asked about human families, about why couples raised young together rather than entrusting them to central nurseries. Daniel described evenings of shared meals, arguments over trivial things, the weight and warmth of a child falling asleep against a shoulder. "It's messy," he admitted. "But it's ours." Messy. Another term for inefficiency. Yet his eyes shone as if the mess itself carried meaning. Kilira recorded the word, but for the first time she did not assign it to a category. It floated free, waiting for a definition she could not yet provide. When the meeting ended, neither moved immediately. The chamber felt suspended, the moon's light painting their faces in equal measure. Daniel stood first, offering her that same open palm again, not as a command, not as a requirement, but as an invitation. This time she did not hesitate. Their hands met once more, and the bond formed like a circuit closing. Not perfect, not planned, but undeniably alive. As he departed, Kilira remained at the window, staring at Earth's pale companion. She realized that what had just occurred could never be entered into any official report. It was not data to be transmitted. It was a secret lodged beneath her ribs, radiating outward, altering her perception of the very stars. For the first time in her life, the princess of the Zarithian Empire understood. Knowledge could be gathered, but connection had to be felt. And in that moment, she was no longer certain which held more power. The council chamber of the Zarithian flagship was all angles and silence. No warmth, no music, no traces of the messy human world below. Only walls of black alloy, polished until they reflected nothing, as though even light dared not linger here. Princess Kilira sat upon the high seat reserved for her lineage, her mantle arranged with ceremonial precision. To the council, she was every bit the heir they expected, cold, composed, a vessel of reason. Inside, however, she carried a secret. It pulsed like a hidden star behind a veil, impossible to name, impossible to quantify. Daniel's hand had left more than sensation. It had left an imprint she could not file away. The counselors spoke in turn, analyzing Earth's worth. Mineral yield, limited. Military strength, negligible. Genetic adaptability, notable but uncontrolled. The conclusion was inevitable. Earth was a curiosity, a lesser partner, perhaps a resource to be harvested. They awaited Kilira's verdict, their eyes sharp, unblinking. She opened her mouth, ready to repeat the expected script. But at that precise moment, the ship's orbit carried the planet's moon across the viewport, casting silver light into the chamber. It was the same glow that had bathed her during that private meeting. In her mind, she heard Daniel's voice. Proximity can be a kind of courage. Her words faltered. "Humans," she began, then paused, recalibrating. "Humans possess variables unaccounted for in prior analysis." The council stirred uneasily. One of the elder advisors clicked his mandibles. "Princess, Clarity is required. Do you deem this species valuable to the Empire or not? Kalira's training urged her to comply, to speak the cold arithmetic they wished to hear. Yet the weight of Daniel's gaze lingered in her memory, not as intimidation but as invitation. She recalled the stories, the music, the touch that had rewritten her understanding of what value meant. They are valuable, she said slowly, because they refuse the perfection we seek. Their flaws create strength. Their imperfection generates resilience. To dismiss them would be to dismiss a force we do not yet comprehend. The chamber fell into silence. For a long breath, no one moved. Then, grudgingly, one of the counselors inclined his head. Another followed. Agreement rippled, reluctant but real. The verdict was recorded. Humanity would not be exploited, but courted. When the session ended, Kalira dismissed her attendants and walked the narrow corridor alone. She felt the mantle heavy on her shoulders, a reminder of duty. Yet beneath it, she carried something lighter, invisible, stronger than alloy, the memory of a bond. Daniel awaited her at the docking bay, where the shuttle stood ready to return him to Earth. He looked at her with the same steady openness as always, though a question hung in his eyes. "Well?" he asked. Kalira hesitated. The words required courage. "Your people will not be conquered," she said at last. "They will be recognized. An alliance will be proposed." Relief flickered across his features, but what followed was not gratitude alone. It was trust, an unguarded faith that she would keep her word, not because protocol demanded it, but because she chose it. He stepped closer. "Then I'll see you again." Her training whispered that she should remain distant, remind him of boundaries, insist this was political. Yet she remembered his definition of homesick, a compass needle pointing backward. Already she felt the needle turning inside her. "Yes," she said, voice low but steady. "You will." For a heartbeat, they stood without moving. Then Daniel, bold in the way only humans could be, reached out once more. She accepted, her hand sliding into his, not as experiment, not as data, but as answer. The shuttle doors closed, carrying him back to the blue world below. Kalira remained in the bay, watching the stars wheel past the open window. Her report would circulate through the Empire, full of measured language and calculated caution. But the true discovery, the one that would never reach the archives, was hers alone. She had been trained to rule by logic, to measure worth in probabilities and projections. Instead, she had found something her empire had long abandoned, the wild, irrational force of connection. It defied equations, resisted control, and yet it felt stronger than any fleet she had ever commanded. The princess who had once been sent to study humanity now carried humanity inside her, not in blood, not in data, but in the echo of a hand in hers, in the resonance of music that still lingered in her chest, in the knowledge that to be imperfect was not weakness, but a form of truth. As the ship turned its gaze back to the stars, Kalira whispered a word she had practiced in secret, one Daniel had taught her. Not through translation, but through feeling. Love. The syllable hung in the air, fragile and defiant. And in that quiet chamber, for the first time in her life, Kalira felt entirely, profoundly alive.